Humboldt County, Nevada, January 14, 1924. 9 in the morning, the desert cold still sharp. Llewellyn Loud was 39 years old and had been employed by the University of California's Museum of Anthropology since 1913, working as a field collector and excavation supervisor under the direction of Alfred Kroeber. He was not a credentialed academic, he had no university degree, but he had developed, through 11 years of fieldwork in California and Nevada, a practical competence in excavation methodology that Kroeber's department relied upon for the physical work that credentialed academics preferred to supervise from a distance. He was a careful man who understood that the value of what he found depended entirely on how precisely he documented where he found it, and he had a field notebook methodology that produced records as reliable as anything published by men with university appointments. He had been at Lovelock Cave in Humboldt County, Nevada, for 3 days when he opened the layer that changed the nature of the project. Lovelock Cave is a natural limestone cave formation in the Humboldt Sink, approximately 90 miles east of Reno. It had been used as a guano mining operation since 1912, when commercial operators discovered that the accumulated bat guano of several thousand years of cave occupation represented a significant phosphate fertilizer deposit. The mining had disturbed approximately 4 feet of the cave's surface layer before Kroeber's department arranged a salvage excavation agreement with the mining company in 1912. Loud had been in and out of the cave for 2 seasons before the 1924 work began, cataloging the surface material that the guano mining had disturbed and working toward the undisturbed layers below. On January 14, 1924, at 9 in the morning, Loud's trowel entered the undisturbed layer at approximately 4 feet below the cave's natural floor surface, and what came up on the trowel was a handful of reddish-brown fiber that was not organic matter in decay. It was hair. Human hair, preserved by the dry alkaline conditions of the cave, with the color and texture of hair that had not been buried for very long, though the layer's depth placed it at a minimum of several thousand years. The hair was reddish-brown. Not the black hair of the northern Paiute, whose descendants occupied the Humboldt Sink region and whose ancestors the cave was assumed to have sheltered. Reddish-brown. In a sealed layer at 4 feet depth. Preserved. But here is what the University of California's Museum of Anthropology has spent 100 years making sure you never ask about. Lovelock Cave's undisturbed layer, below the 4 feet of guano deposit that the mining company had removed before the salvage excavation began, produced 11 mummified individuals in the 1924 season. The mummification was not complete in all cases. Some individuals were represented by skeletal remains with preserved tissue at the extremities. Others were substantially mummified in the trunk and head. All 11 showed the same hair characteristic, reddish-brown, coarse in texture, preserved to the crown of the skull in the best preserved individuals. The best preserved individual, designated by Loud in his field catalog as Specimen 11, was a woman whose mummification extended to the facial tissue. The face showed the hair coloration not only at the crown, but at the hairline. The preserved tissue carried the base of the hair follicles, and the follicle coloration was consistent throughout with the reddish-brown of the loose hair Loud had first recovered. Loud measured the individuals as he excavated them. Not all measurements are recoverable from his field catalog, which survives in fragmentary form at the Bancroft Library of the University of California, Berkeley. The fragments that survive cover 6 of the 11 individuals with usable long bone measurements. Of those 6, the smallest shows an estimated standing height of 6 feet 8 inches, based on femur and tibia measurements. The largest, Specimen 11, the well-preserved woman, shows an estimated standing height of 7 feet 2 inches. 6 individuals, all from the same undisturbed layer, all showing long bone measurements that place them between 6 feet 8 inches and 7 feet 2 inches in estimated standing height. The documented average height of northern Paiute men in the period of first European contact was approximately 5 feet 6 inches. The gap between 5 feet 6 inches and 6 feet 8 inches is not a statistical outlier. It is categorical. Loud's field catalog fragments do not include the measurements for the remaining 5 individuals. The full field catalog, which Loud described in his published monograph on the Lovelock Cave work as containing measurements for all 11 individuals, is not among the fragments at the Bancroft Library. A notation in the Bancroft Library's finding aid for the Lovelock Cave collection indicates that portions of the collection were transferred in 1931 to a federal institution. The notation reading, per Bureau of American Ethnology request of August 1931. The portions transferred are not itemized. The Bureau of American Ethnology's accession records for August 1931 do not list any Lovelock Cave material. Loud's published monograph, co-authored with Mark Harrington of the High Foundation and published by the University of California Press in 1929, describes the cave's contents as representing a population related to but distinct from the documented Northern Paiute cultural tradition, and notes the anomalous physical characteristics of the skeletal material, without specifying what those anomalies were. The monograph's appendix, which in Loud's draft manuscript contained the full skeletal measurement table for all 11 individuals, does not appear in the published version. The published appendix contains ceramic analysis and stratigraphic data. The skeletal measurement table is absent. Loud's draft manuscript for the monograph is not in the Bancroft Library's collection. It is not in the High Foundation's archives at the National Museum of the American Indian. It is not in any archive whose holdings have been surveyed by researchers working on the Lovelock case. The Paiute oral tradition of the Sita-Ka describes a race of red-haired, cannibalistic giants who were the enemies of the Paiute people and who were exterminated in a great fire. A fire that, according to the tradition as documented by Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins, the Paiute writer and activist, in her 1883 memoir, Life Among the Paiutes, Their Wrongs and Claims, was set by a coalition of tribes who drove the last of the Sita-Ka into a cave and burned them out. The Lovelock Cave formation is the cave most consistent with the geographic and geological details of the Sita-Ka tradition. The undisturbed layer at 4 feet depth, the layer that produced the 11 reddish-brown-haired individuals, is a layer that a fire at the cave entrance would have sealed, a fire that collapsed the entrance debris over the occupants of the lower level, creating the sealed atmospheric condition that produced the mummification Loud documented in 1924. Loud does not mention the Sita-Ka tradition in his published monograph. Harrington, his co-author, had documented the tradition in separate fieldwork with Paiute informants. The connection between the physical evidence and the oral tradition is not made in the 1929 publication. The Smithsonian Institution's physical anthropologist, Alesh Hrdlicka, examined the Lovelock Cave skeletal material in 1926. 2 years after Loud's excavation and 3 years before the monograph's publication. Hrdlicka's assessment, published in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology in 1927, identified the Lovelock population as a coastal California type related to the Chumash and other Southern California groups, and noted no anomalous physical characteristics. His assessment does not include any long bone measurements for the individuals Loud cataloged. It does not reference the hair coloration. It does not reference the heights that Loud's femur and tibia measurements implied. His published assessment is based on his examination of the material in 1926. What he examined in 1926 and what is described in Loud's field catalog fragments at the Bancroft Library are not reconcilable as descriptions of the same population. One population is unremarkable by physical anthropological standards. The other produced 6 measured individuals with estimated standing heights between 6 feet 8 inches and 7 feet 2 inches, and hair coloration that every documented Northern Paiute population does not show. Hrdlicka and Loud examined the same cave's material. Their descriptions do not describe the same people. The economic architecture of the Lovelock suppression does not involve mine closures or land acquisitions. It involves publication. The mechanism is the scholarly monograph, a 1929 publication by the University of California Press that presents the cave's ceramic and stratigraphic data in full while omitting the skeletal measurement appendix that Loud's draft manuscript contained. The omission of a single appendix is the suppression mechanism. Without the full measurement table, the physical anomalies of the Lovelock population are not documentable from the published record. Without the published documentation, the physical anomalies are not citable in subsequent scholarship. Without scholarly citation, the physical anomalies exist only in the field catalog fragments at the Bancroft Library, fragments whose completeness was compromised by the 1931 Bureau transfer whose itemization does not exist. The monograph's published appendix contains ceramic analysis. The missing appendix contained the heights. The substitution of ceramics for heights in the published record is the entire mechanism. It required only an editorial decision made between the completion of Loud's draft manuscript and the submission of the publication-ready version to the University of California Press. Who made that editorial decision, and on whose instruction, is not documented in any correspondence that has been located in the Loud papers at the Bancroft Library or in the University of California Press archives. The Nevada State Museum in Carson City holds a portion of the Lovelock Cave material that remained in Nevada rather than traveling to California with Loud's collection, or to Washington with the 1931 Bureau transfer. The museum's catalog includes ceramic objects, basketry, and bone tools. It does not include human remains. The human remains from Lovelock Cave are scattered across at minimum 3 institutional holdings: the University of California Museum of Anthropology, the High Foundation Archives, and the Bureau of American Ethnology's 1931 transfer destination, none of which has produced a complete accession record for the material. A Freedom of Information request filed in July 2017 by the researcher Carol Weiss, requesting all Bureau of American Ethnology records related to Lovelock Cave, Nevada, for the period 1920 through 1940, received a response providing 4 documents covering general regional correspondence. The 1931 transfer was not represented in the 4 documents. The exemption cited for withheld materials was Exemption 3. The cited statute applies to physical specimens. The transfer record is an administrative document. Exemption 3 does not apply to it. The cave entrance at Lovelock is accessible from the state highway. The cave has been closed to public entry since the 1970s by a gate installed by the Bureau of Land Management. The gate is steel, mounted on a concrete frame poured into the cave entrance formation. A camera is mounted above the gate frame, aimed at the approach path, its mounting hardware showing the oxidation of years of desert weather. The undisturbed layer at 4 feet depth is inside the gate, inside the cave, in the same stratigraphic position where Loud's trowel entered it on January 14, 1924. The reddish-brown hair that came up on the trowel is in an institutional collection that does not acknowledge holding it. The 11 individuals whose heights the missing appendix would have documented are distributed across the 3 institutional holdings without a complete consolidated accession record. Llewellyn Loud was 39 years old when his trowel entered the undisturbed layer and found the hair that was the color of something that had not been in the Humboldt Sink for a very long time. He spent 5 seasons documenting the cave. He co-authored the monograph with the skeletal data appendix missing. He retired from the University of California in 1937. His field notebooks are at the Bancroft Library. The missing appendix is not. The hair was reddish-brown. The layer was at 4 feet. The cave is behind the gate. Llewellyn Loud was 39 years old when he found it. The 11 individuals from the undisturbed layer of Lovelock Cave are distributed across at minimum 3 institutional holdings, none of which has produced a complete accession record. The fragments of Loud's field catalog at the Bancroft Library provide measurements for 6 of them. Those 6 measurements produce estimated standing heights between 6 feet 8 inches and 7 feet 2 inches. The measurements for the remaining 5 individuals are in whatever portion of the field catalog was transferred to Washington in August 1931. 5 sets of measurements in a federal institution's holding without an itemized accession record, describing individuals from a cave whose oral tradition the Paiute people preserved for generations before anyone from the outside world arrived to excavate it. The Sita-Ka tradition in Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins's 1883 memoir describes the extermination event with specific physical detail. The last of the Sita-Ka were driven into a cave, and the entrance was set on fire. The Paiute coalition kept the fire burning until the cave was silent. Then they sealed the entrance with the debris of the fire and left. The layer at 4 feet depth in Lovelock Cave is a layer sealed by a fire event. The stratigraphy shows a carbon-rich burn horizon directly above the undisturbed layer, consistent with a significant fire at the cave entrance at a date several thousand years before the excavation. The burn horizon and the undisturbed layer below it are the physical record of the tradition. The tradition and the stratigraphy tell the same story. Loud does not connect them in the 1929 monograph. He presents the stratigraphy and the ceramic analysis and the skeletal data, minus the measurement appendix, and does not mention the Sita-Ka. Harrington, who documented the tradition and knew its connection to Lovelock's geography, co-authored the monograph without mentioning it either. The connection that both men had the knowledge to make is absent from the only formal publication of the excavation. The absence is as deliberate as the missing appendix. The global parallel for a population with reddish-brown or red hair preserved in sealed dry conditions at an age consistent with the Lovelock stratigraphy is the Tarim Basin mummies of Western China, discovered in the 20th century and dated to approximately 2000 BC. The Tarim Basin mummies show Caucasoid physical features and reddish or reddish-brown hair in dry, cold, desert preservation conditions analogous to those at Lovelock Cave. The Tarim Basin individuals were tall, estimated standing heights in the 6 to 7 foot range, with the same reddish hair coloration that Loud recovered from the undisturbed layer. The parallel is physical, not cultural. It describes a population type whose physical characteristics appear in 2 geographically separated desert contexts, one in Central Asia and one in the Nevada Basin, at overlapping dates. The Tarim Basin mummies have been studied extensively by Chinese and Western physical anthropologists and DNA analysts. The Lovelock Cave mummies have been distributed across 3 institutional holdings without a consolidated accession record and have not been subjected to any published DNA analysis. One population is extensively studied. The other has a missing appendix and an August 1931 transfer record without itemization. The Humboldt Sink is one of the driest environments in the continental United States, and the cave's interior, before the guano mining began in 1912, had maintained the atmospheric stability that produced the mummification for several thousand years without interruption. The mining destroyed 4 feet of that preserved record. Loud salvage excavation recovered the undisturbed layer below the mining damage. What the mining destroyed, 4 feet of accumulated cave deposit above the layer that preserved the 11 individuals, is gone and cannot be recovered. What the undisturbed layer produced is distributed across 3 institutions and a missing appendix. Llewellyn Loud spent 5 seasons at the cave and published a monograph whose skeletal appendix was replaced by ceramic analysis between the draft stage and the published version. He retired in 1937 and died in 1964. His field notebooks are at the Bancroft Library. The reddish-brown hair is in the institutional holding that received it. The cave is behind the Bureau of Land Management's steel gate. The undisturbed layer is at 4 feet depth inside the gate, in the same stratigraphic position where Loud's trowel entered it on January 14, 1924, in the sealed, still air of a Nevada limestone cave that the Paiute people set on fire several thousand years before Loud was born, and the layer has been waiting at 4 feet depth ever since for someone to come back with the full measurement table and ask what the numbers mean. The University of California Museum of Anthropology, now known as the Phoebe A. Hearst Museum of Anthropology, holds the main body of the Lovelock Cave collection that remained in California after the 1931 Bureau transfer. A catalog request filed by the researcher James Hart in March 2014, seeking the full accession inventory for the Lovelock Cave material, Received a response listing ceramic, basketry, and faunal material. Human remains were listed in a single line as present in collection, repatriation review pending. The repatriation review, which the museum indicated was ongoing under the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, had been pending since the Act's passage in 1990. 24 years of pending review. The Act requires that affiliated tribes be identified and consulted, and that materials be transferred to lineal descendants or affiliated cultural groups within a defined time frame. The Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe, whose ancestral territory encompasses the Humboldt Sink, filed a repatriation claim for the Lovelock human remains in 1993. The claim was under review as of the museum's 2014 response. A follow-up request filed in February 2022 received a response indicating that the repatriation process remained ongoing. The human remains have been in repatriation review for 31 years. The repatriation process, whatever its ultimate disposition, will produce one of two outcomes. The remains will be returned to the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe for reburial, or they will remain in institutional custody under the terms of the Act. Either outcome forecloses independent physical analysis. Reburial under tribal protocol ends the possibility of DNA analysis, isotopic dating, and skeletal measurement verification. Continued institutional custody under the Act's provisions restricts access to affiliated tribes and their designated researchers, not to independent physical anthropologists. The missing measurement appendix from the 1929 monograph, the 1931 transfer without itemization, and the 31-year repatriation review all converge on the same result. The physical evidence from Lovelock Cave is not, has not been, and will not, under the current institutional framework, become accessible to the independent analysis that would resolve the questions Loud's field catalog fragments raise. Llewellyn Loud documented 11 reddish-brown-haired individuals with estimated standing heights between 6 feet 8 inches and 7 feet 2 inches in a sealed layer below the Paiute fire event at Lovelock Cave in January 1924. The documentation has been managed into inaccessibility through 5 overlapping mechanisms: the missing appendix, the 1931 transfer, the fragmented field catalog, the 31-year repatriation review, and the Bureau of American Ethnology assessment, whose author did not include the long bone measurements in his published analysis. Llewellyn Loud's trowel entered the layer. The hair came up. The measurements were taken. The appendix went missing. Loud was 39 years old. He is the last person whose documented account describes all 11 individuals in their undisturbed position, in the sealed, still air of a cave whose entrance had been sealed by fire several thousand years before he was born. The Nevada desert does not give up its preservation easily. The dry alkaline conditions that produced the mummification at Lovelock Cave are the same conditions that have preserved the organic material in dozens of Nevada cave sites documented across the 20th century. The Lovelock Cave material represents the most extensive pre-Columbian human remains assemblage from the Great Basin in terms of preservation quality, not in terms of numbers, since many other sites produced larger quantities of skeletal material, but in terms of the hair, tissue, and soft material that the cave's sealed conditions protected. That preservation quality is the reason the material is important and the reason the missing appendix is significant. Without the measurement data that Loud took from all 11 individuals and recorded in the field catalog, the physical characteristics of the population cannot be fully assessed from any accessible source. 4 of the 6 partial measurements in the Bancroft fragments produce heights over 7 feet. The remaining 5 individuals' measurements are in the 1931 transfer. The 1931 transfer is in an institutional accession without itemization. The reddish-brown hair is in the collection under repatriation review. The cave is behind the gate. The burn horizon is above the undisturbed layer. The Sita-Ka tradition is in Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins's 1883 memoir. Llewellyn Loud was 39 years old when his trowel entered the layer, and the hair that came up on the first stroke was the color of something that the northern Paiute people had been remembering since before anyone kept written records. And the cave has been behind the gate since the 1970s, and the measurement appendix has been missing since before the monograph was published. And the hair is still reddish-brown, in whatever institutional darkness holds it now, in the sealed still air of a collection room that does not acknowledge receiving it. The Paiute oral tradition that connects to Lovelock Cave predates the excavation by millennia and postdates the extermination event that the Burn Horizon records. The tradition survived the removal period, the reservation period, and the assimilation period of American Indian policy, transmitted from generation to generation in the particular way that population memories are transmitted, in specific terms, with specific places named, with specific physical characteristics described. Sarah Winnemucca Hopkins did not invent the Sita-Ka. She transcribed what her people remembered. What they remembered was a red-haired people in a cave in the Humboldt Sink who were exterminated by fire. What Llewellyn Loud found at 4 feet depth in a cave in the Humboldt Sink was 11 reddish-brown-haired individuals in a layer sealed by a fire event. The tradition and the stratigraphy are the same account told from opposite ends. Neither Loud nor Harrington connected them in the 1929 monograph. The connection has been available since 1883, when Hopkins published it, and since 1924, when Loud excavated the layer. It has not been made in any institutional publication. It has not been followed by any institutional investigation. The cave is behind the gate. The measurement appendix is missing. The hair is in the collection. The tradition is in the memoir. The connection is waiting for someone to make it who has the institutional standing to make it matter, and that person has not appeared in the 100 years since Loud's trowel entered the layer and found the hair that was the right color for the wrong people in the wrong cave in the right part of Nevada. The 31-year repatriation review at the Phoebe Hearst Museum is the final institutional mechanism in the Lovelock case's suppression architecture. A repatriation review that has been ongoing for 31 years for a collection that the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe claimed in 1993 is not a review awaiting resolution. It is a review whose prolongation serves a function. While the review is ongoing, the material is in a legal limbo, not accessible to independent researchers under standard institutional access protocols, not yet transferred to the affiliated tribe, and not subject to the kind of comprehensive physical analysis that would resolve the questions Loud's field catalog fragments raise. The review's prolongation keeps the material in the institutional system without allowing the institutional system to formally account for it. Llewellyn Loud documented 11 individuals with reddish-brown hair and estimated heights between 6 feet 8 inches and 7 feet 2 inches. The measurement appendix was removed before the 1929 monograph was published. The 1931 transfer took portions of the collection without itemization. The repatriation review has been pending for 31 years. Each mechanism forecloses a different avenue of access. Together, they produce a situation in which the physical evidence of what Loud found at 4 feet depth on January 14, 1924, is distributed across 3 institutions, none of which has a complete consolidated record, in a legal status that prevents comprehensive analysis, and the cave is behind the gate, and the hair was reddish-brown, and Loud was 39 years old when his trowel